the deadline for this for 2017 has been extended.
Yeah, a bit of a bizarre news conference in that they were blowing off steam, talking a lot of politics and not much substance, admitting there were a lot of problems, but at the same time, they have agreed to extend the talks into 2018. And there was a lot of talk about wanting to get this done by the end of 2017 because the Mexicans have a presidential election in the summer of next year. The U.S. Trade Promotion Authority, fast track, expires in the middle of next year. And the U.S. also has an election in November of next year. So it would be very hard to conclude something if you go too far into 2018. But they've agreed to talk all the way through the first quarter. So it does suggest that on the one hand, while they're saying bad things about each other, they feel enough hope that they're scheduling negotiating sessions farther down the road.
All right, let's bring in Nacha Cattan because Mike just mentioned the Mexico elections. Talk to us a little bit here about what an inability to conclude this agreement by end of 2017 does to the Mexican election prospects of the incumbent.
Sure. The elections are in July 2018, and the candidate that right now is in the lead is leftist Andrés Manuel López Obrador. He's got an advantage that's pretty substantial, but it's still very early. And the thought is that if there isn't a solution, or worse, if the U.S. steps up from the table and walks away, this would benefit López Obrador and his leftist policies. It would give him strength. You know, even if not him, then anyone else in the opposition, which would hurt the president's party's chances going forward.
David Scanlan, I want to bring you in. Obviously, if NAFTA were to collapse, Canada still has a bilateral trade deal with the U.S. it could theoretically fall back on. What is the Canadian priority here? Would it prefer to fall back to that rather than see a bad NAFTA deal?
Well, I wondered, you know, when Minister Freeland started talking about the Arlington Cemetery there to start, I thought maybe that was a metaphor for the death of NAFTA. But clearly, you know, if this were to fall apart, Canada would probably be the least disrupted here. There would be a short-term hiccup. There would be some uncertainty. But Canada can fall back on the free trade agreement with the United States. So there may not be that much of a disruption.
Mike, I want to talk about the back and forth that we saw them. You hinted at this. Unconventional proposals, Chrystia Freeland called them. Make a good agreement better. These proposals, some of these proposals that the United States has come up with, run counter to WTO rules here. Then we had the Mexican representative there saying, look, we all need to acknowledge that we have limits here as well. Are we going to be able to resurrect NAFTA, or is the United States kind of justifying a way to get out of this in what they're asking?
Well, that's the many trillion-dollar question, the $53 billion trade deficit question with Mexico. We don't know exactly where they're going with this. The idea that they have extended the talks is good news and suggests that, yes, they do want to make progress. Donald Trump keeps saying it's a bad deal and we need to do something else. And Robert Lighthizer today highlighted all of the problems that the administration sees with the deal. But the non-starting proposals all seem to come from the United States. So the other two countries are saying, you know, we can't walk backwards. Lighthizer did try to talk about, without specifying, areas in which other countries were not giving ground. But mostly it's the U.S. that has put some non-negotiable things on the table for the other countries.
Yeah, the interesting thing is to look at the markets here briefly, and we haven't done that, is we've got dollar Mexico trading at the, you know, the lowest level of the session here. For some reason, investors thinking that this is a positive. And as you point out, Mike, the fact that these talks are continuing, investors are saying at least Mexico's still in the game here.
At least it hasn't fallen apart. Nacha, I want to go back to you from the Mexican perspective. You know, it's always dangerous to try and get too many analogies, but thinking about Brexit, you know, concerns post that vote about investment freezing up, or people not sure about what the status of the UK is going to be, and so putting off investment decisions. Is there any indication that, you know, are people getting concerned about that in Mexico right now, that investment plans, we heard it a lot after the election, and the chatter went away for a while, that investment plans in Mexico being delayed amid the uncertainty?
Sure, that's always a possibility. And let me say that the most important, the most difficult sort of pill to swallow for Mexico would be specifically rules of origin in the automotive sector. Why? Because that's where Mexico is gaining all of its investments over the past several years. It's the biggest engine of growth from exports for many years in Mexico. So while I think that they could deal with perhaps some of the other concessions on government procurement or dispute panels, even the sunset clause. When it comes to rules of origin, that I think would be clearly the line in the sand, because 85% is way too high, and 50% just U.S. requirement of content would be very difficult for the automakers in Mexico to comply with.